All right, good morning, everyone. So thank you for joining us for today's webinar on, where we'll be giving a labor update from some of our nurses on the front line from SAUHW. Of course, we also represent folks from UNEC and CNA, and today we're joined by SAUHW. Gabe will introduce in a minute. We'll also be giving a brief policy update on stuff the Fed has been working on. And then obviously the main event today was housing insecurity and updates on policy and around in LA County and LA City on tenants' rights, and just a reminder in some of the previously existing policies in this time where a lot of folks are struggling to pay rent and have a lot of questions on what is often a very nuanced subject. So on behalf of President Ron Herrera, again, and the LA Fed, welcome. And I'm going to pass it off to Gabriel Montoya. Thank you for joining us. I know you've been working 24/7 straight from the front lines, seeing the impact of this on a lot of folks on the day-to-day. And so thank you for giving us, agreeing to give us an update today and taking some time.
You're welcome. So yeah, today is today's a day that I get to be off the front lines, but I will be honest with you all, it's real. I think working on the front lines really shows us how impactful this virus is and what it can actually do to patients. And it's really showing us the status of our healthcare system. And so one of the things that we're experiencing as frontline workers is we're finding out that there are some vulnerabilities in our healthcare system. For example, the amount of PPE that our workers are limited to. So, normally as healthcare workers, we make decisions about personal protective equipment based on the type of illness someone has, whether it's droplet precaution or an aerosolized illness or a contact illness where it's communicable through contact. Now we find ourselves making decisions about personal protective equipment based on supply. And so that's something new for healthcare workers who have always been trained. Me as an EMT, I've been trained my whole life that I make decisions based on scientific sound research. I am able to make decisions based on what makes me feel comfortable as a healthcare worker and based on the symptoms of a disease and how it's communicable. But now we're making decisions based on the supplies of our employers, the supplies of the government, and that makes it tough to be on the front line. Although we still continue to go to work and do the work, we are finding that the shortages of masks across the state. I work for Kaiser Permanente, which is a statewide system. So we find that there are parts of the Kaiser system that are lacking personal protective equipment. And this actual fight, if you will, we are finding that personal protective equipment is becoming a class issue. And so some of our blue collar workers in the hospital field, some of our workers who are lowest wage workers appear to be having the hardest time across different hospitals in this state getting personal protective equipment. Even nurses, EMTs like myself, respiratory therapists, we also find it difficult to get personal protective equipment to protect ourselves. And so, we find ourselves in a position where we really, really, really need government to really consolidate its efforts to produce personal protective equipment for healthcare workers, because we cannot do our job if we're also the ones getting sick at the same time. We're also finding that healthcare workers are dealing with existential issues like childcare issues. Many of us, work in the field. We had children that went to school, and we had places that they can go to before and after school. And we don't have those opportunities anymore for childcare. So it is becoming a struggle within the healthcare workforce to be able to come to work and still find places where we can have our children be taken care of. In the past, many of us rely on grandparents, but right now is not a good time to be taking your children between your home as a healthcare worker and the home of your elderly parents, because children can be carriers, and although they may not show symptoms, they can pass this off to their grandparents, which can actually be highly impactful. And the other thing we're finding out that healthcare workers are dealing with is the fact that rent cost and mortgage cost are also having an impact. There's this misconception that the front line is made up of nurses and doctors, but the front line is also made up of environmental service workers, of food and nutritional service workers, of CNAs and medical assistants, transport orderlies, many of which may be still working, but their spouses have lost their jobs, making it difficult to make ends meet at home. And so a lot of these issues are issues that we have to deal with as healthcare workers, both inside and outside the facilities in all aspects of our life. Hugo, feel free to check me if I went over my time. And, as we move through this, I think it's imperative and important for our elected officials, all the way from city levels to state levels, to really take into account the issues that healthcare workers are talking about, because we really are going to be the backbone of fighting this issue. One of the things we also need to discuss is, how does it work for healthcare workers who may not have sick time at work or may not have personal time off at work, and they, contract this disease while on the job? What efforts are we going to take to protect those families and their families when they get home? And so we're also, talking about what do we do with healthcare workers who may not be able to go home because they're afraid to give this to their families. But first and foremost, I think we can really deal with a lot of these issues if we first deal with the personal protective equipment issue, because that's what keeps us safe. That is what keeps us from bringing this home to our families. Having N95 masks, which we are in short supply of, definitely. In fact, where my employer has already moved on to instructing nurses and practitioners how to, we're going to start learning how to clean those masks so that they can be reused for multiple days. And then we're also running out of equipment that goes over our clothes to protect us from contact with it. We're also running out of eye protection. So these are things that really people need to start thinking about, and we look at the public to really push an effort to get their elected officials to jump in and make sure that we have the equipment we need in order to serve our patients. Sorry, Hugo, I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Gabe. Very, very briefly, I don't know if you could just touch on just some brief reminders on misconceptions about prevention that, the general public may be, in terms of removing gloves properly, washing hands, not touching the face, et cetera.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that people need to understand is, for one, we really need, washing hands is probably the most important action you can take to protect yourself and your family. This virus has a very long estimated viability time on surfaces. Some estimates go from 24 hours to 2 weeks on some surfaces. And so washing hands is extremely important. In fact, I would go as far as to say is washing hands is more important than wearing gloves. You cannot get this virus through absorption through the skin. And so a lot of times we see people wearing gloves in public and they're touching surfaces in public, like at grocery stores, they're touching shelves, doorknobs, food boxes, food containers, shopping carts, and then they go in their car and they use the same gloves to touch their steering wheel, their cell phones, their radios. And so really, gloves tend to actually, in many of our opinions, actually create another mode of transmission because people are not conscious to wash their gloves, right? But they are conscious to wash their hands. And so hand washing is key. If you go grocery shopping, yes, you should wipe down your cart, maybe take some wipes with you, wash down your cart. Once you come out of the grocery store, you should, if you have hand sanitizer, use it. If not, when you get home, the very first thing you should do when you walk in your home is wash your hands. Also, we have to talk about the fact that people need to take quarantines very seriously. So, we have heard stories of, people who are told to go in quarantine because they're going to get tested, or they're waiting for test results back and they think, well, I'm going to just go shopping to pick something up real quick. No, you absolutely have to stay home. If you're someone who's waiting to be tested, who's waiting for results back, it is important to stay home. We also need to make sure that people don't believe that masks are a license to go out, right? Masks are another preventative measure, but we shouldn't take them for granted and think that this is an opportunity to have a free-for-all. You still need to quarantine at home. If you need to go grocery shopping, you need to have a face covering. And understand that the face covering is to prevent us from coughing and sneezing on each other, and communicating this disease across different people that we run into at stores or grocery stores. But it's not really gonna protect you, right? It's keeping your cough in, but not keeping things out. That's what a lot of these face coverings are meant for. So that still means you have to be cautious when going out. It also means that you have to make sure that when you come in to your home, you should really make sure that you are having a dirty station and a clean station. In my home, we enter through the garage. We have a table that says clean and dirty. The dirty table, we put our belongings, our groceries on that table. We wipe them down, move them to the clean side, and then bring them into our house. We also leave all shoes outside of our door. We don't wear our shoes inside the home either. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you're using either Clorox wipes, or you can use something like Pine Sol, something that will disinfect to clean surfaces you touch all the time. So faucets, doorknobs, light switches, surfaces that you and your family touch all the time should consistently be cleaned at least a couple times a day in order to make sure that you're not transferring any of that across the family. And of course, if someone is showing symptoms in your family, you want to designate them to one room in the home so that other people in the home aren't put at risk. I think it's on mute.
Thank you so much, Gabe. So we really appreciate everything on behalf of the labor movement, everything you and your colleagues are doing. We appreciate you personally, who's been working 24/7, putting yourself at risk, helping others, and took time today when you could be resting or handling other personal stuff to give us an update from the front lines and remind us of how to take care of ourselves. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Hugo, for having me.
Thank you. And so we'll be transitioning to Armando Olivas, the Executive Director of Labor Community Services. We'll give a very brief update to everyone on the stuff Labor and Community Services has been doing on the food front for folks and other support services. Armando?
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's staying safe and well and continue the protocols that we have in place. Stay at home. So just to give you a quick update on Labor Community Services Food and Emergency Program, what we've been doing the last 2 weeks, we were able to provide food for over 7,300 families. Around 30,000 individuals have received food from our food pantry in partnership with the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor and the LA Regional Food Bank. They have been great. They have provided us this food at no cost, and we are regionally providing food to our members and the community throughout the greater Los Angeles area. Today we are in Burbank with the IATSE's union. I'm sitting in my truck looking at a line about 2 miles long. So we're going to feed close to 900 today. Tomorrow we'll be in Van Nuys, and we'll be able to provide food for around 1,200 to 1,500 families. And then Fridays, it's a big one. It's a mega one for the LAX unions and surrounding community. It'll be at the Forum. We're going to kick that one off at 9 o'clock from 9 to 1. We estimate that we will provide food to around 5,000 households on Friday. So we have been very busy. I appreciate all the support that the unions are providing us, our staff, for coming out and helping us to make this possible. We have 3 scheduled next week, and you probably will receive something from Christian, our comp team, with the calendars and times. If you want to, also there's a place to sign up if you want to come out and help and do that. Most of all, stay home, stay safe, and really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Armando. Appreciate you, and good luck out there today. We'll be out there with you for the coming months. And up next, the Fed wanted to give a brief policy update on different policies that have been moving for workers and community. The Fed has been spearheading. So we have our policy director for the LA County Federation of Labor, Rob Notoff, will be giving an update.
Thank you, Hugo, and thank you everybody for joining. And before I even dig in, I just wanted to thank Gabe and all of the other just frontline workers who are out there and really just, doing God's work for all of us, right? So our workers in hospitals, our sanitation workers, our janitors, our delivery drivers, just wanted to say thank you to all of them for all the critical work that they are doing for all of us. So a quick update, and I've got about 10 minutes to cram a ton of stuff in here. So I'm going to do my best to stay within the time frame. Hugo, please keep me on track if I'm going a little over. But what we want to try to do is, there's a lot of stuff that Gabriel was talking about that we need to do, and we know that this public health crisis is also creating an economic crisis in its wake. It's just leaving a trail of economic devastation for all of us that we're feeling. And so what we're trying to do is work with our elected officials to try to soften the blow as much as possible, right? We don't have any silver bullets in our toolbox here, but we are trying to figure out what are some tools that we can do to try to at the very least, ease the burden and make sure that when we do begin, one, that we're trying to protect workers in the midst of this pandemic. And then when we're coming back online, that we can try to have policies that try to soften the blow as much as possible and get everybody back online as quickly as possible and as close to where they were when this thing began. So we've got basically a 4-legged platform. What we're tackling is emergency sick pay for everybody. We are tackling some health and safety measures. We're tackling protection for grocery and delivery drivers. And we're tackling policies around recall and retention for hospitality and janitorial workers. And we've got 3 main targets that we're looking into right now. One is the city of Los Angeles. The second is LA County. And the third is the city of Long Beach in terms of starting points, because we think that those are the largest entities that we can focus in on. And hopefully if we move stuff there, that other cities within the county will follow. So the first one, as I talked about, was sick days, and it's pretty basic, right? We're trying to make sure that everybody or any worker who's still employed and who hasn't been furloughed or laid off, it has the ability to stay home and recover per the CDC guidelines, right? That they have 80 hours of sick leave, which is 10 working days, and their 2 weekends to try to make sure that they can stay home and self-quarantine as needed and not put themselves, their coworkers, or anybody else at unnecessary risk. So we moved forward on, we ran this by the LA City Council, and what the LA City Council wound up moving was something that tried to address the shortcomings of what the federal policy had done. So the federal government passed a policy that more or less covered 21% of the workforce. It really only covered employees who are at businesses that had between 51 and 499 employees. So what the city council in LA moved was a policy that said any business that has over 500 employees is mandated to provide 80 hours of sick pay for everybody. And that was passed, again, with the unanimous 15-0 vote on March 27th. And then for folks who may have seen either this morning's LA Times or watched the mayor's emergency announcement last night, but there has been an update. The mayor did sign the bill or the ordinance that was passed by the council, but he did make a few additional tweaks to it. And so what was passed, or what he finalized today through his own emergency order, and I've got my notes in front of me, was that he changed it to mandated sick pay for any businesses who have 500 employees within the city boundaries of LA or have over 2,000 employees nationally. And I think that the mayor's kind of rationale behind that was he wanted to try to protect some businesses who may be at risk of going out of business permanently if they felt that this was too burdensome for them. So that was his what he was stating in terms of his rationale behind that. It's also exempting people who have already given 160 hours of paid leave to employees. And then he moved forward with a motion that would, with a measure that would exempt healthcare personnel, including janitors or anybody at hospitals, government employees, and parcel delivery. So that was signed by him last night. And then the final two components that were in his emergency measure were exempting companies that had opened within the past 6 months and businesses that have closed their doors for at least 14 days as a result of any city orders. So that's the sick days policy in terms of LA. Our two targets moving forward now are LA County and the city of Long Beach, which we think there should be something that will be introduced this coming Tuesday. So please please stay tuned on that front. When it comes to the health and safety stuff, the mayor also addressed last night in an emergency order that we wanted to move forward with some mandated guidelines that to us are pretty common sense and what we'd like to call no-brainers, right? And it's making sure that employees have the ability, as Gabriel was just talking about, to wash their hands at least every 30 minutes or as frequently as needed without being penalized or docked pay for doing so. So the mayor moved forward with an emergency order that mandates that or allows employees to wash their hands without being retaliated against every 30 minutes to make sure that they are protecting themselves and anybody else that they're coming into contact with. The mayor also moved forward with a directive, as folks may have seen, that's going to require, beginning on Friday, that everybody in the city of LA, when you're in a public space, that you have to have a face covering. Doesn't have to, we don't want to use the N95s, as Gabe said. We want to make sure that those are being prioritized first and foremost for essential employees within our healthcare facilities. So, but there is a mandate around face coverings. And there's also a push, there's no guarantee or mandate, but a push and encouragement for other stores who are still functioning and still in operation to have a plexiglass shield between the cashier and the public as well, just to, again, try to mitigate any spreading or passing of germs. And so the mayor's moved forward with that. And again, we're cautiously optimistic that Long Beach and the county will follow suit, given that they both have their own public health departments. The third kind of bucket that I highlighted was around grocery and delivery. And so we know that in addition to everybody, the other frontline workers in our hospitals and pharmacies and sanitation workers and janitors, that grocery workers are really critical right now. It's one of the few places where we can actually go to congregate. And what we want to try to do is make sure that those stores don't turn into petri dishes where people are going and actually contracting the virus. So we have a two-step approach through this. The first is to protect the actual workers in the brick and mortar stores. And at that same March 27th city council meeting, this also passed through a unanimous 15-0 vote to make sure that any of those workers in the brick and mortar grocery stores have the ability in the city of Los Angeles to say, look, I've got a child at home. I have some scheduling issues, so I need to make sure that I can go home and take care of my child who, while LAUSD is closed down, to take care of them, and it's my turn to do daycare duty. That they would have the right to do that and not be retaliated against. And also in the event that where they do have some scheduling issues or pushback, that before the grocery stores hire on new employees, that they are offering up any hours that free up to part-time employees first to make sure that they're up to speed. So that is something, again, that passed with a 15-0 unanimous vote with the LA City Council. And the second part that we are pushing for is to protect the actual delivery drivers as well, right? We know delivery drivers are playing a crucial role in terms of making sure that our vulnerable populations, like our elderly populations, do not have to go into grocery stores and put themselves at further risk. And that we want to make sure that delivery companies are actually training their delivery drivers on how to do a no contact delivery, and to make sure that they also have the sanitation materials that are necessary. And right now, the way it's working is companies like Instacart or Amazon Fresh, et cetera, DoorDash, they're saying that they are providing stipends for employees to buy personal protective equipment. But I think you and I on this call know that if anybody has been into any grocery store or any kind of store to try to find gloves or sanitation wipes or anything, those shelves are barren. And so to offer up a stipend is basically meaningless if people can't actually procure or purchase the goods for themselves. So what we're trying to do is make sure that the actual companies can provide it versus just providing a stipend, which it just doesn't necessarily work the way that things are playing out right now. So that's the third policy platform that we're driving. And then the final one is around recall and retention. And what we want to do is make sure that anybody who's laid off or loses hours or has hours cut as a result of the pandemic has the ability to, and as people are, as we're already seeing, the first of the month has come and people are struggling to pay rent. People still have a number of questions about how they're going to actually get themselves back online. And while the LA City Council passed a policy that gives people upwards of 12 months to pay back any back due rent, it's going to be a scramble, and it's going to be extremely difficult for folks to get back on their feet to, one, make sure they can pay rent and just get their lives back to normal, but two, owe any back rent. And for us, the best thing we can do is to make sure that people at least can have a job, or the promise or the perspective, knowing that their job will be there waiting for them when the economy begins to come back online. So we initially tried to do a citywide approach, and the LA City Council actually balked at that at the March 27th meeting, and they decided to punt on the issue for a little bit. And so what we want to try to do now is we're trying to whittle it down at first, because there are some industries that have just been absolutely devastated as a result of the pandemic. In particular, the janitorial and the hospital industries, where Unite Here Local 11 has actually had 30,000 members. They are now down to 500. 30,000 to 500. So you can imagine what's going on there. And I think that's why we're trying to, at the very least, when we revisit this at the LA City Council and then in Long Beach and at the county, that we're prioritizing the hospitality industry first and foremost, and as well as the janitorial industry, which is also experiencing a lot of hardship right now. And for us, it's also about an immigrant rights issue. Because as we've seen from the federal government on down, a lot of people are not talking about some really key essential vulnerable populations, particularly the undocumented population. And having a recall and retention policy allows the undocumented workers, the undocumented population, to at least go through and try to skirt the issues around an e-verify process to make sure that they can also begin to plan and have a roadmap on how they're going to pull their lives back together when we're finally out of this pandemic. So we're looking to try to bring these two policies forward on Tuesday, again, within the county of LA and also the city of Long Beach. And then we're looking to revisit the policy with the city of LA in the coming 2 weeks here. So we'll keep everybody abreast, but that's kind of the update in terms of what we are driving right now. Those are the priority ones for us at the current moment.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you for all the amazing work you've been doing leading on this policy front for the Fed, along with Ron Herrera, the president, and the rest of the team. So up next, we have Carlos Aguilar, who is the Director of Organizing for Coalition for Economic Survival. And he's really, what we wanted to focus this webinar on today, right? As Rob mentioned, and Gabe mentioned earlier, housing and rent has really been a struggle for a lot of folks in this time. And it's something that it was already an issue going into this crisis and has been exacerbated by COVID-19. So Carlos, please take it away.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Considering the circumstances we're all living in, it's nice to see some friendly faces that are in the struggle together. Rob, I completely, I'm with you on our frustration and struggles with the LA City Council. It's tough, but we're slowly but steadily moving forward. So thank you for allowing us to come and share some information with folks, because yes, definitely housing and employment are tied, and we've always believed that. If you don't have a good paying job, you don't have the means to be able to afford paying your rent. And now with these this economic crisis, it's a lot more pronounced than ever before. So you know, folks that are underemployed or unemployed or at risk of losing their jobs are more now at risk of losing their housing. And so hopefully today we get to cover some information that will help guide folks and give a basic understanding of what the renters' rights are in the city and to some extent the county. But definitely want to thank the LA County Fed for putting this together. The Labor Community Services, Hugo, thank you for inviting me. So I will start with our presentation. Let me just share screen. Okay. So just a little background on who we are. We're a Coalition for Economic Survival. We are a tenants' rights organization. It's one of the oldest, longest serving organizations in the city and county. We were founded in 1973, and we work to help tenants secure their rights to healthy, safe, and affordable housing. So some of our efforts are definitely protecting rent control, combating slum housing conditions, eradicating exposure to lead paint poisoning for small children to ensure that their educational attainment is not blocked or arrested due to poisoning, and stopping unjust evictions and displacement, and preserving affordable housing. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and start talking about rent stabilization ordinance. So what is the rent stabilization ordinance? A lot of folks do not know what it is, or they call it rent control, but it's technically called a rent stabilization ordinance, and it protects tenants from unfair rent increases, unjust evictions, and often provides relocation benefits in tenant no-fault displacement. And we'll talk about what no-fault means. So for a long time, the only place that had, or locally, that had rent control or RSO was the city of Los Angeles. And recent efforts by allies and advocates have made positive changes in the city and the county, as well as a state. So we'll talk about that. So first thing you need to do is find out, are you under RSO? Are you under the traditional LA City rent control ordinance? And you're most likely under LA rent control if the property you live in was built before 1978, obviously in the city of Los Angeles, and there's 2 or more units on the lot. So that excludes single family homes in the city of LA, and it excludes buildings that were established after 1978. So some of the newer buildings would be exempt under this original Los Angeles rent control. For you to find out if you are under the Los Angeles rent control, or just to exclude that, I put down the phone numbers and contact information for the Housing and Community Investment Department of Los Angeles, formerly known as the Housing Department, LA Housing Department. You can text, or if you're savvy enough or willing to take a stab at it, go to zimas.lacity.org and check the housing staff tab for the RSO status. So once you found out that, yes, I am under the LA City rent control ordinance or rent stabilization ordinance, you want to check that you are under this jurisdiction. So the city of Los Angeles has 15 council districts, council members representing those districts, of whom we are all advocates, housing and labor advocates are working with to make sure that we can get the support that we need in this difficult time. There's LA City is over 60% Angelenos that are renters, excuse me, and that covers over 624,000 renters. So what rights do I have? What protections do I have? So there are 14 legal reasons for evictions that are split between tenant at fault and tenant no fault. Rent increases are stabilized, and there's a bottom of 3% and a max of 8% that the rents can go up to. And that is determined by the housing department. It's a one rent increase per a 12-month period. There's also relocation benefits that vary by status, income, and landlord type. So the tenant at fault. The tenant at fault means that you've had some say in this, or you've committed some action or activity that caused the landlord to file an eviction against you. And that includes the number one reason, right? Non-payment of rent. And this is the main sticking point for us tenant rights advocates at this moment, right? The non-payment of rent. And right now it's considered at fault. It's your fault you didn't pay the rent. So we're working really hard to change that, the way that's being discussed, and we're having some success. The violating of tenancy and failure to cure violation means you violated one of the terms of your contract. And that right now has some caveats, right? Right now, folks are having to care for a sick or elderly relative that might be in violation of that contract, because there's no additional tenants that's supposed to be allowed through that contract, or you're caring for the neighbor's pet because they've suddenly fallen ill and they can't take care of it, or you've taken a family member's pet, or you've adopted a pet just to help you through this stay-at-home order. So those are things that could potentially be a violation of your contract up to in the traditional sense. Committing a nuisance or causing damage to the unit, usage of the rental unit for illegal purposes, refusing to renew your lease agreement that is similar or with similar terms, refusing the landlord reasonable access to the unit for inspections or repairs given proper notice, and having a subtenant in possession of the unit that wasn't approved. So you transferred the unit to someone else, and now that person is taking the unit to unit's possession. And no fault means it wasn't your fault. There's no fault can be attributed to you as a tenant for having these evictions proceed against you. So the landlord wants to take the unit for their family or an on-site manager. That's allowed under rent stabilization ordinance, unfortunately. The landlord wants to do work under primary renovation guidelines and has come up with a plan approved by the city, but the tenant is interfering. The owner wants to do an endless eviction, which is a state law that allows them to demolish or remove the units from the rental housing market. The landlord wants to comply with order to vacate by the government. And the last three are HUD is in possession and they want to sell the property, or the owner wants to convert or demolish a residential hotel. And the number 14 is the owner wants to convert to affordable housing accommodations. So they want to do an affordable housing program. So it's important to know these 14 legal reasons, because that's how you're going to understand the context of what's coming next, where we're going to talk about what checks and moratoriums have been put in place to cancel some of these landlord rights to evict, and you'll understand them as we move forward. So the other part of the rent control is, of course, the rent increase, the annual rent increase. Up until recently, the annual rent increase was allowed, and it has been for those folks up until June 30th would be a 4% rent increase. Now, for the county of Los Angeles, we have a very large region to cover. So we've talked about the city of Los Angeles. Now, what is the county of Los Angeles? So in the county of Los Angeles, we're talking about the parts of the city that are considered unincorporated areas. And these are areas that are covered by the LA County Board of Supervisors, and that's basically their local city council, and they're responsible for managing the services for the area. This excludes the 88 incorporated cities that have their own local governments. Any part of the LA County that has their own city and city council local government would not be under the unincorporated LA County jurisdiction and laws that are being proposed and passed. So am I in LA unincorporated territory? You can call the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs hotline to see if you are in one of those unincorporated territories, or you can go to this website for the planning, LA County Planning Department to find out. That way you would know if you have if you're not within LA City and have those rent stabilization protections, you might be within unincorporated territories and have protections through LA County unincorporated laws. So LA County unincorporated just executed a county rent stabilization ordinance that is permanent as of April 1st. So this is new. There was temporary protections up until the 30th of March. Now it's transferred into a permanent law as of the 1st. So now tenants that are in unincorporated areas have 9 legal reasons for eviction, which are the split between tenant at fault and tenant no fault, similar to the LA City, which has been used as a template for a lot of our collective efforts. Rent increases range from 0 to 8%, and that's determined by DCBA, and it's also 1 per 12-month period. Relocation benefits are slightly different from LA City, where the relocation varies by unit size, special qualification, and income. Now, for both special qualifications means senior, disabled individual are considered special qualifications that can possibly afford you more relocation in no-fault situations. That applies to both LA City and county unincorporated rules for no-fault evictions. So the tenant at faults for LA County unincorporated territories are similar to the housing department ones with some slight changes. Of course, again, the number one reason would be non-payment of rent, violating tenancy and failure to cure violations. Same as I said before, it's basically not complying with your contract, your existing contract, terms of your contract. Creating nuisance, damage, or any illegal activity. Refusing to execute a new term of a new lease of contract. Refusing orders to vacate and comply with relocation application. And for the county specifically, they wanted to add that if you exceed income limits in government regulated units. For tenant no fault in unincorporated territories, the no faults are less. And so landlord seeks to recover for family member. Landlord wants to demolish under Ellis Act. And landlord is complying with a government agency order to vacate. The annual rent increase for unincorporated RSO varies, and it's also tied to the consumer price index. It's average is about 3 to 8, but if the CPI falls below 2, there would be no rent increase. Right now, the rent increase calculated is 3% for LA County unincorporated. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of state of California implementing some rent controls, rent protections. Now, that was the Tenant Protection Act of 2019. That is permanent as of January. Now, the way that it flows is if you have rent control under the city of LA, you're protected under those guidelines. Remember, I said it excluded single-family homes and properties built after 1978. If you are in LA County unincorporated, then you have those protections granted under LA County unincorporated areas. Now, the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, which was Bill 1482, it provides broader protections for areas that are not covered under either of those. So there are 9 legal reasons for eviction under this state law. There's 11 at fault. There's 4 tenant no-fault evictions. And the rent increase applies, if it applies to you, it would be 5% plus the local rate of inflation, not surpassing a max of 10%. And it's also 1 per 12 month. So, for example, in LA County, we would have a 5% plus the local rate of inflation is 3.4, I believe. So it would be a total of 8.4 rent increase if you are, let's say, living in a property that was built after 1978 in Los Angeles, in the city of Los Angeles. Okay. Now, the Tenant Protection Act of 2019 provides similar protections and rules on what is considered an evictionable offense. Again, even with the state, non-payment of rent, a breach of contract, nuisance, property damage, criminal activity, subleasing, denying access, tenant no faults are limited to owner family move-in, Ellis Act, complying with a government order to vacate, or intent to demolish or remodel the unit with permits. So to bring those together, the City of LA, County of LA unincorporated RSO, and the AB 1482 bills, you can get a sense of what the requirements are there. Now, they're very similar, have similar applications, and the good thing about it is that it limits the types of evictions or reasons for eviction that a landlord can impose on a tenant. Before anyone had these protections, the landlords were entitled to evict a tenant with just a 60-day notice, and they didn't have to provide a reason. They didn't have to state anything really, and they didn't have to give any tenants any relocation benefits, which in the city of LA ranges between $8,500 to $21,200, depending on qualification. In the county, it would be $7,654 up to $21,411. The state law is much weaker, and that is payment equal to 1 month's rent. So if you pay $1,000 rent, then you would only get $1,000 relocation benefits under the state law. Unfortunately, it's not as strong as we would have liked it to be, but it's better than nothing. I think the efforts from tenants' rights advocates throughout the different jurisdictions and cities statewide really forced the governor to pay attention and implement these rules, which took a while to get, but advocates are happy that at least some folks get protection now that weren't covered before. The only and its permanence is somewhat mislabeled. It's a 10-year law, so it's permanent for 10 years, but then it's subject to renewal. So we have to keep an eye out for the state assembly bill for it to be renewed, or much better, to be made permanent. So now let's go to evictions, because evictions have been changing recently in the process, but we need to understand what the process is, first of all, because folks often ask, the owner is trying to evict me, and he sent me a letter to leave the property. So let's discuss that. And then, can the sheriff come and evict me? So this is the eviction process. Tenants usually get a 3-day notice to fix the violation. You didn't pay your rent on time, it's 3 days. You have those 3 days to cure that violation, to fix that problem, and the summons is canceled. If the tenant doesn't respond, then the landlord can now go to the court and file a summons and complaint, which is a formal filing for an eviction, unlawful detainer, it's called, which then transfers paperwork, which is called an answer form. Summons and complaint is sent to the tenant so they can answer, and they have 5 days to file from the date that they got that letter. And then a trial is set. Now, it was important for tenants to file within those 5 days, or else there would be a default judgment and they would be given a notice to vacate automatically. Now, once the tenant filed, then a trial date was set, and you went to court. You hopefully got a good lawyer and asked for a jury trial, and you got a judgment. If you win, you get possession of the unit. If you lose, you move out, and then the sheriff comes and puts a notice telling you have 5 days. They come back with that court decision, because they're the ones who execute the evictions through the court, and then they make sure that you're vacated. So no sheriff would have been coming to your home without having a court order or court summons. So keep note of this, because this eviction process has changed in the past couple of weeks. So what are a tenant's rights during COVID-19 emergency? So there's been a lot of emergency declarations because of COVID-19, and the governor initiated some of those by doing an emergency declaration that bans enforcement on eviction orders, bans utility shutoffs, and empowers local governments to prevent evictions. That means locally, LA City Council, the Board of Supervisors, was empowered to do their own local enhanced protocols, because the governor's mandates, which were very broad. On the 27th, the governor enacted statewide delay and defense for evictions for non-payment due to COVID. And that really just means that in cases of evictions or an unlawful detainer, the process was delayed, and it allowed for tenants that were facing evictions to have a defense for that eviction for non-payment of rent, that it was related to COVID. So 60 days was granted to file that answer that traditionally is a 5-day response period. And then court decisions on evictions would not be executed. But tenants must have paid their rent in March. That was the mayor's specific order. Tenants had 7 days from the date that the rent was due to pay the rent, to notify the owner, that they were having hardships and would not be able to pay the rent. So if your rent is due on April 15th, you have 7 days from when that is due to notify the landlord in writing that you are having a hardship. So you can use that as a defense and protection in case the landlord tries to do an eviction. And it also asked for repayment in a timely manner. It didn't say specifically when or how, it just said timely manner, but it did require to show proof in court that you had a hardship due to COVID-19, but that was when you had a court date to defend an eviction. It's not for the landlord to demand for you to show proof, as has been commonly interpreted by landlords right now. The mayor's office, or the mayor in the city of Los Angeles, on March 15th, getting local over here now, the mayor also did a defense for an inability to pay due to COVID-19 only. So if the reason you weren't able to pay your rent is attributed to that, you would have a defense in an eviction proceeding. You would have 6 months to pay the back rent at the end of the emergency period when that emergency was declared ending. Now, this 6 month was extended by the city council to 12 months, which is a lot better, considering what we're going through. 6 months was just not feasible, and tenant advocates all around pushed for at least a 12-month, if not more. Later on, he expanded it to protect no fault and LS evictions, and that's extended through March 15th. And his other declaration was RSO rent increase was issued after March 30th of this year are now invalid. So that means no rent increases until after May 29th within the city of Los Angeles. So if you get a notice from the landlord saying that they're increasing your rent for some reason, that would not be valid. City Council did further enhancements on March 27th, and all of these were retroactive to March 4th. So non-payment, again, protections, non-payment of rent due to COVID-19 reasons is now a valid defense. Evictions for unauthorized occupants, as the example that I gave, if you have a relative that you're taking care of at your home, or you're at their home taking care of them, so you're an additional unauthorized tenant according to the contract terms, that violation or supposed violation is now canceled. If you took in a pet, or you have a pet to take care of for a sick relative or someone who's been quarantined, or you're quarantined and you got that pet to tide you over, you are protected now. That's been canceled. Nuisance, this specifically was put in by advocates because we know families now are staying in place, and we're all doing a great job of doing that. So there's youth, toddlers, children under 18 that are now at home. So it's obviously a lot louder. There's obviously a lot more activity going on in the home, and we didn't want landlords to now say you're causing and creating a nuisance, you're being too loud, too much ruckus, too much going on here. So that now has been removed. So parents cannot should not feel stressed that their children are being active or hyperactive at home. That's just a condition of what we're going through, and landlords need to understand that. There's also prohibited no fault evictions. So any of those rules that we went over where it's no fault of your own that you would have been evicted, they're now prohibiting that, and Ellis evictions are prohibited too. Ellis eviction proceedings or applications by landlords are not being accepted either. Owner cannot charge interest on late fees or rent not paid, because we were hearing that landlords were still going to be charging late fees and interests. And the period to repay was extended to 12 months by the city council on the 27th. And it also did not require proof of loss or payment plan within their guidelines. And this overrides the mayor emergency orders that were previously put up. Okay. Now, for LA County unincorporated, effective March 19th, they had similar terms and protections for unincorporated territories. It prohibited the filing of evictions related to loss of income or increases due to COVID. Tenants must send a letter within 7 days to the landlord stating that they're having that hardship. The order is retroactive to March 4th. The rent is due right now, as was posted. It is due within 6 months of termination of the emergency. So we're asking folks to help guide our county supervisors to extend that. It is silent on proof to be provided, but if an eviction is filed, you will need that proof in court. So we recommend that folks start documenting their hardship, not to provide to the landlords, but to provide to your attorney if you do get served an eviction after all of this is cleared. It extends no fault eviction, the protections to no fault evictions also, and to tenants that are not protected. Now, housing assistance recipients also get an extension to meet housing eligible requirements, and this applies to the vast number of affordable housing buildings that are within LA County unincorporated. And it asks utility companies to take steps to prevent late fees and utility terminations. Okay. Now, the county courts, which manage the eviction processes, on March 16th, they delayed eviction answer periods. So even if you answered or you had to do an answer, it wasn't mandatory or required until April 16th. But just this week, the Judicial Council, which is the overseeing body of the county court system, came out with a determination and declaration that there would that the clerk could not issue an eviction summons, and even if the owner attempted to file the eviction, they would not be able to do so until after 90 days after the governor lifts the state of emergency, unless it was necessary to protect the health and safety of individuals within the complex. The LA County Sheriff had already said as of March 23rd that there would be not processing any evictions that were declared under through the court. So the main thing is this judicial council that just came in. That basically puts the last piece there that will hold up the entire eviction process, and I'll go over that. And for federal rules for protections, tenant protections, any recipient that has a federal mortgage is now ordered to suspend an eviction. That means tenants in federally HUD subsidized housing are protected under this rule. So what does that look like now? So of the 14 legal reasons in LA City, all tenant no fault evictions are suspended. Non-payment of rent is suspended if it is due or attributed to COVID-19 reasons. The failure to comply with contract terms, I've already mentioned. There's exemptions to that. So evictions for having additional tenants is suspended. Evictions for having an authorized pet is suspended, and evictions for a nuisance, which would be the third one, because maybe your kids are too rowdy, or so the landlord claims. That is not an enforceable eviction situation. For number 6, if the landlord wants to come into your unit, yes, the landlord could have given you a 24 written hour notice to come in. But if you do not feel safe and comfortable with that owner or representative coming in because A, they don't have protective gear, they have not, or B, not giving you any plan on how they're going to mitigate the possibility of transferring the COVID to you or any tenants, you can safely tell them, no, I will not. I cannot, due to concerns that there's going to be transfer of COVID to the family, or you just want to make sure that someone who is under quarantine does not expose anyone coming in. So you can legally say that. Okay. Now, for the county, what does that look like? All tenant no-fault evictions are now suspended. The non-payment of rent, again, if it's due to COVID-19, that eviction is suspended. Violating tenants' terms of tenancy, that's suspended, as I mentioned, is similar to the LA. Household exceeds income limits, that is suspended right now because they're giving tenants that live in those affordable housing units to stay in place while their status is recalculated, and giving tenants an opportunity to bring the supporting documents in a timely manner. So now for the eviction process, what does that look like? The 3 key points where a unlawful detainer or eviction process would continue, all of them have been suspended. So the first one was suspension of the sheriff's processing of a court order. The sheriff suspended that. Then the court temporarily suspended unlawful detainer cases going to trial until for 60 days. So the main thing that just came out right now with the Judicial Council is this, that the court will no longer accept summons and complaints. So there is no ability for the court to process them. The owner can still file, unfortunately, if they do so online, but the court will not process them to trigger a summons and complaint that a tenant would have to file and answer, and go through the unlawful detainer process. So For all intents and purposes, unlawful detainers and evictions are suspended right now. The process is suspended. Owners can still file. You know, all tenants should be prepared for that and prepare their documents accordingly. Because even though they can't process them, and you can't get a default judgment against you because you didn't answer those evictions, if the landlord wants to file, they will be waiting until after that the process is continued. The good thing about the Judicial Council review is that that process will not continue until 90 days from the date that the governor removes the state of emergency. So that gives us a little bit of relief and ability to focus on what is most important at this point, right? So wanted to go over some key terms that was brought up. There's a lot of discussion of what is a moratorium, a ban, a freeze, forgiveness. So wanted to give folks an opportunity to understand what some of these terms are and how we're viewing them. So moratorium is a temporary prohibition of a legal process or activity. Slightly different from a ban. A ban is officially or legally prohibit any action whatsoever. A freeze is to suspend enforcement of. Forgiveness is to pardon or waive. So how are they being used, or how would we, how should we see them as we advocate for ourselves and for our neighbors and our families and our community? So definition of eviction moratorium is to temporarily prohibit any action that will lead to an eviction. Okay, so it's a temporary prohibition. Eviction ban, to officially or legally prohibit any action that will lead to an eviction. The eviction moratorium has a deadline or a sunset date where it has to be renewed. Eviction ban is until further notice, basically. A rent freeze is a suspension of enforcement of rent increase collection. Rent forgiveness, which is what we're all asking for, all advocates are asking for, is to waive all accumulated rent that is due or past due. I think that's something that we all should push for. It's going to be extremely difficult, even with a 12-month, in the city of LA, a 12-month ability to pay back the rent. It's going to be very difficult for some of the industries that are hardest hit, as was mentioned earlier by our colleague, to recover and hopefully, you know, there's an ability to waive that accumulated rent, and we're trying to tie that with mortgage forgiveness as well. If mortgage forgiveness is approved, it should be tied to a rent forgiveness to the tenants. So I will put this here. I'm not going to go through it entirely. I'll leave it here because this is going to be recorded, and you all can use this as a reference guide to come back to. So the mayor has frozen rents on all rent-controlled units. The city council has made retroactive to March 4th all protections and affirmative defense for no-fault evictions. There are affirmative defenses for evictions, and these I will cover. Reasons related to the pandemic are loss of income related to workplace closure, childcare expenditures due to school closure, medical expenses for a member or household being ill with COVID-19 or caring for a family member with COVID-19, and expenses for complying with government agency measures. Okay. So as I said, we have 12 months to pay the rent, the back rent, no late fees or interest allowed. And landlords can agree with the payment plan with tenants, but advocates don't recommend that because that can lock you in to something that is now a legally binding agreement. So I would hold off on making those type of payback agreements that are not required by the city at this moment for tenants. Okay. The LS Act evictions are canceled for 60 days until the end of the emergency order. That prevents landlords from trying to evict tenants because they want to tear down the building. Now, for unincorporated Los Angeles County, tenants are protected for non-payment of rent for all no-fault evictions by order of the supervisors. Tenants currently have 6 months to pay back. They have to let the landlord know within 7 days of missing the payment, explaining the circumstances. And acceptable reasons are caring for a member who has a COVID, loss of a job or income for COVID, complying with the quarantine, out-of-pocket medical expenses related to COVID, or loss of childcare from due to school closures. Okay. So we're working closely with Healthy LA Coalition, and we are calling for stronger moratoriums on evictions, rent forgiveness, mortgage suspensions countywide, immediate freeze to all residential, commercial rent utility bills, 14 days paid sick leave to all workers and prohibiting retaliation, and showers, hand washing stations, bathrooms, and other services at informal settlements, among other things. So we encourage you to participate and go to the Healthy LA website to find more information on what our collective efforts are. So what are some next steps for LA City Council? Just met on April 7th, and Councilman Bonin and Ryu are really leading a lot of these efforts for tenant advocacy and tenant defense, calling for an eviction moratorium, responsible banking that encourages banks to do business with the city of LA to disclose their plans to provide mortgage and rent relief, and prioritize those banks that help Los Angeles renters and working families when deciding future contracts. We want to make sure that banks are not taking advantage of the situation and not being considerate of working families in the city of LA, and lining their pockets with profits without care for our community. Classifying rent debt as consumer debt, changing that so it becomes a different type of situation that doesn't put at risk your housing situation. So instead of getting an eviction hearing that you have to go and defend in court, it would be a matter of collection of debt, if anything, which is less severe to some extent than having a displacement. Rent freeze and rent and mortgage forgiveness, as I had mentioned earlier. So we encourage folks to call 411 to connect with your local city council representative. They just met, so they will be meeting in the next week or two to discuss these proposals for Councilman Bonin and Ryu. And we hope that you get an opportunity to express your support for these, if not all these, Healthy LA and Bonin and Ryu supported motions. For the county board meets again on April 14th at 9 a.m. Please give them a call asking for eviction foreclosure moratorium, to remove the requirement for failure to pay. That means removing the inability to pay due to COVID-19, just make it inability to pay. Rent forgiveness and a mortgage suspension. Implementing a county-wide rent freeze is also one of the things we're asking for the county to determine on April 14th, or come to a decision about prohibiting late charge and late fees. That was something that was done by the LA City Council, and expanding the rent repayment period to 24 months at least, if not more. So these are things that the Board of Supervisors is discussing at this point and is asking for a report back on. So we strongly encourage folks to call their supervisors in support of these demands. Okay, so there's some additional resources for folks that if you want more tenants' rights information, you would like to get linked to our e-newsletter that brings in, sends you information, updates, call to actions on issues affecting renters in the city of Los Angeles. Please contact us at contactces@earthlink.net. If you'd like a sample letter to the landlord explaining your hardship situation, please also contact us. And there's also other resources that I'm putting up here for all LA County tenants. If you want to follow the mapping of the response to COVID-19, LA County has a dashboard. You can look at the different maps for different needs, such as food banks, where food distribution is being held, testing sites. There's Food Policy Council. Testing is now open to all LA County residents, regardless of your condition. So you can go to this following website. And here's some additional resources you can look into. So I'm putting that there. Hopefully you all get to check out these other additional resources as time allows you. So thank you, everyone. I hope this has been useful. And you can always give us a call at 213-252-4411 or contact us at contactces@earthlink.net. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to take any questions and discuss any issues you may be having. It's very difficult time right now for everyone, and we're all trying to do our best collectively to ensure that this COVID-19 epidemic does not get the best of us, and we can still have opportunities to remain in place and follow the orders that we've been given to remain at home and keep our home. One thing that I do want to add is we've heard that landlord attorneys are advising their clients to not rent to specific prospective tenants in certain industries that are hardest hit. So be on the lookout for that, because that is a discriminatory tactic. That's a discrimination based on ability to pay and source of income. So we want to make sure that these really poor recommendations by landlord attorneys do not take root, because none of this should be happening. They shouldn't. Up until the Judicial Council, landlord attorneys were still advising and counseling landlords on how to evict tenants. So we need to do everything we can to push back and make sure that our rights are respected, and that there's human decency is paramount in these times. So thank you, everyone. I wish you all the best, and I hope that you all stay safe and healthy. We'll get through this together, and I look forward to continue working with you. Yes.
One quick question that maybe you have the answer or not to know, and maybe we can direct folks to you, but if you happen to know, one question we got on the Facebook Live version of it was, what about those that have pending evictions? Will they be pushed up?
Pending evictions, those are suspended for now, right? Because the sheriff is not going to process if the court has already made a decision and the tenant has lost. The sheriff is not processing that court mandate. So the tenant has that temporary protection. If the eviction was in the process of going to jury, that jury trials are suspended right now. If the owner filed and a summons was, let's say, somehow got to the tenant in a normal times, the tenant would have those 5 days to file, or else they would be a default, basically a judgment decided against them. But with the judicial council determination, the tenant now does not have to respond, and we don't recommend tenants respond even if they've got that 5-day summons to not respond to that until the courts reopen, which would not be until 90 days till after that is cleared.
Thank you, Carlos. And again, thank you for those that joined today. Carlos' information is there. You could also reach us out to the Fed for this or any other questions you have for future webinars that we'll be doing on various issues that have been exacerbated by this crisis. So Carlos, and to you and the Coalition for Economic Survival, on behalf of President Ron Herrera and the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor and Labor and Community Services, thank you so much for taking the time and providing this very valuable information. And thank you to all who tuned in. Again, this will be recorded and shared out for you to share with your membership or other folks that you think this would be helpful for. Thank you all, and hope we'll get through this together. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.